everyone, welcome to the March 31st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski to take a look at Saturday's card at Oaklawn Park, specifically the late pick 5 sequence, which does feature their major Kentucky Derby prep race, the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby. $1.25 million is the purse, 100 qualifying points on the line to the winner of that race, so basically guaranteeing a spot in the Kentucky Derby starting gate. That is the penultimate leg of this sequence. Also in the pick 5, they're running their Oaks prep, the Grade 3 Fantasy for the 3-year-old fillies. They're not back-to-back. One is the 10th race, the other is the 12th race. There are a couple of allowance races in this sequence as well, N1X allowance races at differing distances, one a sprint, the other going the mile, and the sequence kicks off with a pretty interesting maiden special weight going the mile in the 16th distance. All dirt races, of course, with it being Oaklawn Park. It sounds like we're going to have decent weather for Saturday. Some minor thunderstorms predicted on Friday when we're recording this, but it sounds like we're going to have a fast track for Saturday, so we'll view our handicapping through that frame. And Craig, this is a difficult sequence. I mean, I went through it. I would say I have opinions on some of the races, but I haven't quite wrapped my head around how I would put this ticket together, so I'm hoping that talking about it with you gives me some clarity.
Yeah, this is a tough sequence, no doubt. And we kind of talked about it last week a little bit. I don't want to go down that road again, but pick 5s are hard. And when you look at the field sizes for these races at Oaklawn, it doesn't do us any favors. It's a very tough one. It's one I'll probably try to play. I'm not going to play it on a big ticket. I'll probably keep it to, have some solid opinions in a couple races, spread in a few others, but it's a very difficult sequence. They did spare us an Arkansas bred race. I know that made me happy. And when I say that, I hope people don't take it the wrong way. I'm not knocking Arkansas breds. Heck, I wish I could own some with some of the purses they're giving away, and they are developing that program because of those purses, and it will get better. I just find them very difficult to handicap personally. It doesn't mean I dislike the Arkansas bred horses.
No, I feel the same way. It's nice to have some high-quality runners at a variety of levels in these races. It seems like there could be some talent, even in the allowance and maiden races that we're going to talk about in this sequence. And, I say that I'm not sure how I'm going to play it yet, because even though we choose sequences to discuss on this podcast that we think are going to be interesting, races that we believe we're going to have some opinions in, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to play every sequence that you handicap. And sometimes you come up with opinions that don't really fit putting together a pick 5 wager. So we'll touch upon all of that at the end when we get our opinions out there. But you don't want to just decide you're going to play a sequence before you actually sit down to, one, work out if you can afford the play that you put together, and also see if it makes sense from a value standpoint. Craig, let's dive into this sequence, and we'll begin with that 9th race. It is a maiden special weight event going the mile and the 16th distance for the 3-year-olds. 10 runners signed on, and it's a difficult place to start because there are a lot of ways to go in this race. Plenty of lightly raced horses with some upside. I believe the morning line favorite is one of 2 Ken McPeak trainees, the number 5, Seeking Unity. And Craig, this is the horse to beat. I don't really have a major problem with him. You could argue that he should have broken his maiden already because he's been short prices 3 starts in a row and hasn't gotten the job done, but he's still run well in all of those spots and has gotten some nice TimeformUS speed figures, so I wouldn't say I'm way against this horse, but I do think there are others that might offer more value.
Yeah, we talked about favorites last week that you really don't like at all and want to play against, and then favorites that they're probably going to be overbet, but they're still contenders, and I think he falls in that category. He has the best speed figures in the field. In TimeformUS, he's run upper 90s the last 3 races, which is as good or better than everyone in here. But one concern has to be that he's run second 3 times, and he's done it all at short odds, the highest odds being 2-1 last time. So I don't think he's a horse you want to lean on too heavily. There's a couple others that I like in here. I'll let you talk about him first before we move on to some others.
Yeah, I thought that Two back, he really had a chance to win and just kind of gave it up at the end of that race. Actually, he's been beaten by a couple of horses that we're going to see as big prices in the Arkansas Derby a little bit later last time in two back. And then last time he was just beaten by one of those horses, Interlock Empire, who made that relentless run from the back of the pack, and nobody was beating him that day. So Seeking Unity, I mean, he's fine. I just feel like there are others that are going to fly under the radar a bit more, that are ones that you'll be better off getting in the first leg of this pick five sequence if you're trying to be against some favorites that can actually make it pay a decent amount. So I'm going to talk about some others, Craig, but before I do, I want to just mention a couple other short prices on the morning line and gauge how you feel about them. The number 8 Route Runner and the number 10 Quality Chic, the latter of which is the other Ken McPeak runner in this field. I don't know. Route Runner is 7-2. I didn't see a whole lot to recommend about him. I'll kind of be surprised if he ends up going off that short for Steve Asmussen. His last race was just nothing special. I watched it, and he was pretty much one pace throughout. Quality Chic's a little more interesting to me because he did have to steady minorly at the top of the stretch in that Turfway maiden race two back. I don't know if I would agree with the comment trouble trip, but I mean, he did have a brief spot of trouble in that race and was just kind of green. Didn't take as much of a step forward as I would have hoped for last time in that dirt race at Oaklawn. Was a little rank in the early portion of that race, but again, he just lacked any turn of foot and stayed on at one pace. So I kind of view these horses as being fairly similar. They don't have much speed, and looking at the pace projector, we don't make characterizations in maiden races like this, but I don't see that much speed signed on, so I'm not sure I want to take these one-run closers.
Yeah, I agree. I'll start with Route Runner, the one you mentioned first. He's 7-2. I just think it's a bad morning line unless people are just going to bet Steve Asmussen on faith, because there's not a whole lot there in the running lines. He doesn't have any speed. He didn't run well last time. He went off at his highest odds last time, 7-1, after being bet heavier first two. So I don't really see that one at all. Quality Chic, the 10, is the other Ken McPeak. I guess you could give him a small excuse last time. I don't like his post, and I especially don't like the fact that he has no early speed whatsoever. But of the two, I would probably use the 10 as like a C horse in here. The 8, I'm not going to use at all.
I'm going to bring up a horse that I'm interested to see if you agree with me on, Craig, because I feel like it's one that you might like also. And that's the other Steve Asmussen horse, the number 2 Auto Glide. This horse is 15-1 on the morning line. We'll see how they ultimately bet this one. Just one prior start on the turf last year at Ellis Park, going all the way back to July. So he was a pretty young 2-year-old at that point, and I thought ran okay. He drew the 12 post, had to be hustled to the front end. The pace of that race was fast, it fell apart, and it's not like he completely threw in the towel at any point, just barely, holding on for fourth, but I mean, it's not like he was disgraced at the end of that race, despite going off at a big price, 25-1. He didn't take any money that day. He's been off for a long time. It's coming off the layoff here, but as I was kind of getting at before, I don't mind a horse that has some early speed in a race like this, because I don't see that many that want to be forwardly placed in this race. And I was looking up some stats for Steve Asmussen in Formulator, and I found something surprising, because Steve Asmussen is one of those trainers where the sample size is so large, it's really hard to find particularly positive or negative stats for Steve Asmussen, especially when you're looking at him for all tracks. But with maiden special horses in maiden special weight races going from turf to dirt in their second starts, Steve Asmussen is 15 for 58, 26% with a $2.80 ROI. And in route races, turf to dirt, with those maiden special weight runners, second starters, he is 8 for 29 with a $3.57 ROI. So there is some really positive stats for this horse, and he's got plenty of dirt pedigree on the dam side. So I wonder if they just ran him on turf because they wanted to go long last year.
Yeah, he's a horse I like. You got this one right for sure, and there's not really a whole lot more to cover. I know Steve Asmussen does well in general second off the layoff, and I looked up those same stats as you did coming off the turf, and they're all positive. I doubt we're getting 15-1 on this horse, but he's one I'm going to use pretty heavily on my tickets. I've mentioned the 2, the favorite, Seeking Unity, the 5, and the 10 horse Quality Chic that I would use as a C. I would almost say Auto Glide's right up there with the favorite as one I'm going to lean on as an A-type horse. The only other horse I really wanted to mention in here was the 4 horse Gamekeeper. He's trained by Wayne Lucas. He's a horse who I just know Wayne Lucas's MO. He's obviously been around the game a lot longer than I have even. He doesn't do he kind of brings his horse into form as they move on. I think he's a little dirtied up from his last race where he kind of got shuffled back early. His speed figure's not very far off the favorite, so he's one I'm also pretty interested in.
Yeah, I agree. That seems like a horse that could do a little better. He kind of falls into that category for me with the two drawn to the outside that we talked about that just are a little one-paced and don't have a lot of speed. But he's a third-time starter, as you said. Wayne Lucas has that MO to bring them along a little bit more slowly these days. He actually has a positive ROI with all third-time starters, if you look that up in Formulator, especially even with maidens. Gamekeeper is one that I could use. One more horse that I want to include, Craig, and probably use pretty prominently in the first leg of this pick five, is the horse drawn on the rail, the first-time starter. I think the only first-time starter in this race, the number one, Night Effect. This horse cost a lot of money at the OBS two-year-old sale last year, going for $330,000. And that's a lot of money for a Malibu Moon. I mean, these days, Malibu Moon at different times over the past decade or so has been considered one of the top sires in the country. It seems like he's kind of gone out of fashion a little bit lately as he's become a much older sire. The bloodstock game tends to favor the newer freshman or second crop sires at these sales. But that's a lot of money for a Malibu Moon. And when I go back and watch the workout that produced that purchase price, I can see why. This horse went 10 flat and just showed off this beautiful fluid stride. I mean, the kind of work that, really catches your eye. And it's obviously taken him a long time to get to the races, but he's a horse that's bred to go long. Seems like they probably just took their time with him. There's plenty of pedigree on the dam side. The dam is a horse named Dreams Galore, who some people might remember from the late 90s. She won the Mother Goose, was second in the Kentucky Oaks, a really good horse. And there are some nice workouts for this debut, especially the last couple. Obviously, I haven't seen them, but the times seem like they're pretty strong. For Riley Mott, I don't think this horse is going to take that much money, but just based on that two-year-old sales workout, I get the sense there could be some talent here. So I want to use this horse.
I was planning on copying off of you on this test with the first time starter. I knew you would have some good information, so I didn't dig too deep. Certainly could fit. Like I said, nobody has standout figures in here. We've seen some 3-year-old maiden races where the horses are running almost as fast as stakes horses. This isn't one of them. Seems like they're taking their time, so I'm fine with Night Effect. No others really interested in me. There's some that have finished close up, but I think they're coming out of much weaker races. So that's the 5 that will be on my tickets. I know that sounds like I'm really not narrowing it down, but for this race, that's the kind of leg this is for me.
And I think we're going to be able to pare things down in the next leg of this sequence, the Grade 3 Fantasy. This is the one that we've already discussed, Craig. We did a video preview that you can find on DRF's YouTube channel about the Fantasy. We put that out yesterday. And there are two favorites on the morning line, Craig, that I think we both agree look like legitimate favorites. One of those is obviously the number 6 Wet Paint, who I think could be shorter than that 8-5. She's pegged out on the morning line. She's just kind of gained a nice following since those last 2 stakes victories. Arguably, she's been more visually impressive than she has been impressive against the clock, because the speed figures just don't really make her a standout in this race. But when you watch the replay of that Honeybee, I mean, she was really flying through the stretch, just motoring past rivals, coming up the inside and then between horses at the very end. The question for her is handling a fast track, because it does seem like she's finally going to get on a fast dirt track on Saturday, but I do get the sense she's pretty good.
Yeah, we've talked about her before on both the Pacecast and the Forecast. I think we handicapped the sequence she was in the last time. And I know I mentioned on the Pacecast, I don't think she's a filly that you really want to judge too harshly on the speed figures because of her running style. She's run decent enough speed figures, low 100s to mid 100s, but she just hasn't really had a hot pace to close into. She just kind of gets the job done, and that's actually more impressive for me because she hasn't had that pace and still is able to have these explosive finishes. I forget what the time was from GMAX for the last quarter, but I know you brought it up on the video replay we did. It was very impressive. So I do think she's clearly the horse to beat. When we were first looking at this race before the morning lines came out, there was only one other horse that interested in me, and I was hoping it would be more of a price source. Turns out it's not. It's a second choice on the morning line, but I think she's the logical other horse, and that's the one. She's looking lucky. She comes out of an allowance race where she was beaten pretty handily by a horse named Punch Bowl, but that horse Punch Bowl was pretty good. I think she would be vying for favoritism with Wet Paint had she been entered here. I assume she's pointed to another Oaks prep somewhere because she looked that good. She's 2 for 2, won both of her races in impressive fashion, one sprinting, one routing, and just looks like a really good filly. So I don't want to knock she's looking lucky because she was beaten so easily, because she ran speed figures that are right there. She has good tactical speed. She draws a good inside post. So I think she is the main danger. And I actually think she's a very real danger. I would use these two in pretty equal strength, I think.
Yeah, these are the two that I want as well. I have nothing really to add about She's Looking Lucky. I agree. She was beaten by a good horse last time. She's really stepped forward since the trainer switched to Matt Shirer, and it just seems like a really logical horse. If I had to rate these two on, let's say, a value line, I probably would rate Wet Paint as being a little bit more likely to win than She's Looking Lucky. I think Wet Paint is a legitimate favorite. I just wonder if the disparity in odds between these two is going to be a little greater than it shows on the morning line. I could see Wet Paint being even money, maybe even 4 to 5 territory, just kind of based on how this field came up. It feels like she could be a very short price. So given that, I'd rather take She's Looking Lucky, who I think will be a better value play. Not that I expect her to offer great value, just better than Wet Paint. And they're the main two, Craig. The others, I mean, they're all coming out of the Honeybee almost, where they were beaten pretty handily by Wet Paint, so it's kind of hard to take any of them to turn the tables on her. I mean, I did like Condensation a little bit, who was second in the Honeybee, and I feel like, I did well that day, getting the exacta, kind of surviving what maybe should have been a Stewart's Inquiry and wasn't, but she was 21 to 1 that day. She could be a shorter price here, and this might be a tougher spot, and I just thought we saw her maximum ability that day, getting a great trip, and there's more speed in this race. I don't know if she's going to be able to pull off that same result. And as for the others out of the Honeybee, I have trouble making a case for them. There are some new faces, but they just didn't do enough for me.
No, I agree. The one horse out of the Honeybee I tried to make a case for when I was doing my handicap was Towhead, who had run that big speed figure 2 back. I guess if you want to give her the sloppy track excuse, you could. I worry more about Lasix, that maybe it doesn't run as well without Lasix since that big speed figure came with it. And the more I watched the replay of that Honeybee and just saw Wet Paint just blow by her when Towhead was in the clear, had every chance to make a run. She ran okay to the wire, but it's just hard to imagine her turning the tables on Wet Paint. And as you said, the others coming from other races, I just can't get too excited about them.
Let's move on to the next race in this sequence, the 11th on this card. It's an N1X allowance race going the 6 furlong distance. Pretty large field signed on here, 12 runners. And Craig, so we have two favorites that are bookending the field in terms of post position order, and Go West drawn down towards the rail, and then Favorite Outlaw all the way on the outside. And this is another situation where I feel like both of these horses are probably legitimate. We can debate what the fair odds on both of them are, but I think that when you're deciding who's most likely to win the race, you kind of have to start the conversation with those two.
I agree. I would personally have the morning line flipped. I really wanted to be against Go West when I saw the pace projector and saw all the early speed. I think he's probably going to take money just based on Skelly, who came back and ran a huge race next time out. But it doesn't mean that Skelly ran the same race this time to only lose to him by a length and a half. But as I look through the field, he still just has the best speed figures. The one question is, does he need the lead? Because his best races lately have come on the front end. And I don't think he actually does need the lead, but he is going to have to take some dirt if he doesn't get it. So I don't think he's a horse I wanted to be keying on too strongly in here, but I can't dismiss him. And the same goes for the horse on the outside, Favorite Outlaw, trained by Chris Hartman, second time in his barn. He had definitely improved on his form first time out. Chris Hartman does great second time in the barn, just like he does first time. And it's just hard to totally dismiss them. And I want to dismiss short prices as often as possible, but I just couldn't get there in this race.
Yeah, and I mean, the other point I'll make about Go West is That allowance race that he's coming out of, that was a really strong race. I mean, not just the winner, Skelly, but I mean, there was a lot of depth to that field. And just look at the TimeformUS race rating for that race. A 117 compared to the projected rating of 110 for today's race. So even though they're both N1X allowance races, this might be a slightly softer spot for Go West. So I do think he makes a lot of sense. I don't know the answer about what kind of trip he's going to work out from the rail. He does have a fairly aggressive rider on his back in Rayla Gutierrez, so I won't be surprised when they decide to get aggressive with him and want to be forward. I just think he makes a lot of sense in here, and I agree. I might have my personal fair odds on both of them switched, but I think he's slightly more likely to win. As for favorite outlaw, I mean, he was beaten by a good horse last time in Corona Bolt. That is that talented 3-year-old for Brad Cox, who they tried to stretch out in the Southwest. They didn't really work out, but he's a very good sprinter, and favorite outlaw just couldn't quite get to him last time. First off, the trainer switch to Chris Hartman. What I didn't like was watching that replay. Favorite outlaw never switched leads, and you could see Francisco Arrieta kind of, shifting his weight, trying to get this horse to switch over to his right lead, and the horse just never did it, and he was never able to find that second gear to really challenge the winner in the late stages. So that's a minor concern, but he was coming off a layoff that day. Maybe we'll see him be more professional this time. I think both of these horses make a lot of sense. They are both horses with speed, though, and the TimeformUS pace projector is predicting a fast pace. There is quite a bit of speed signed on here, and that makes me question some others that might want to be forward, like the number 2 Breslaw, who's just coming out of some weaker races, is in good form, and I liked how game he was to win last time, but he's really stepping up in class. And the same goes for the number 7 Emerald Forest, who's coming in from Fairgrounds, switching over to Robertino Diodoro. This is a horse who's run some big speed figures different times in the past, but he's really done a lot of his winning on lesser circuits, and I just feel like this is a tougher spot for both of these horses than they faced recently.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to make a case for Emerald Forest was he did read off the pace last time a little bit, and it was a very slow pace. Still was coming at the end, but it was a much cheaper race than this. As you mentioned, the TimeformUS race rating was just a 105, so I was a little iffy on him. If I was going to use some others, it would be just that the race might fall apart and maybe just give a couple of the closers a shot. They would be C horses at best, horses like Rider Special for Steve Asmussen, whose first start as a 4-year-old had run some decent speed figures at 3, but he has no speed whatsoever, so he would need a complete collapse. And the same goes for the 5-horse Ultimate. He's run speed figures that could get the job done if the pace just collapses, but it would be C's for me where it just got crazy up front and fell apart. I'd rather them than the other speeds because I think the 2 favorites, no matter what happens, they're going to be good enough to put away the other speeds.
Yeah, the speed that scared me a little bit more was the 9 Absolute Chaos, and I don't like this horse, really. He's got wet tracks twice in a row since coming off the layoff, so maybe he'll do a little better on the fast going. That's where he's run his biggest speed figures. I don't think he's as good as the 1 in 12, but he does have some numbers that put him in the mix. So if he's 15, 20 to 1, I don't want to completely dismiss him, especially given the possibility that one of the favorites might not break sharply. There's always that outside chance in the back of your mind that this pace might not develop the way it looks on paper. We see that happen all too often. So I don't want to completely rule out a horse that looks like he's competitive on paper. I had trouble making a case for the 2 closers that you mentioned, Craig, Ultimate and Rider Special. Ultimate, I mean, he's been in a lot of fast-paced situations before, and I shouldn't say a lot of. He's got 1 blue color-coded running line there and a lot of no characterization. But I mean, it just feels like he's been in races where he's been making that late run and just doesn't quite get there. So I have trouble taking him in this spot. And personally, I've never thought Rider Special looked like a sprinter, so I wonder if this is just a prep off of the layoff. The one horse that I'm a little interested in at a bigger price that I would use as a win candidate is the number 4, Dr. Perry, the other Steve Asmussen horse. And I know he looks a little bit slow compared to these, but this is a horse that showed some talent when he was a 2-year-old. I mean, he actually went off at 3 to 1 in that loaded Jack Christopher maiden race when that horse won his debut so impressively. And obviously, Dr. Perry didn't run that well that day, but he came back with a good effort to break his maiden impressively at Churchill Downs and then had some time off. I thought his first couple starts as a 3-year-old at Ellis and Churchill were actually okay. He faced some good horses, particularly 2-back. That horse Air Combat was in great form at that time. time. And then last time, I mean, he didn't get the right trip. He got badly shuffled out of position on the backstretch, and his race was basically over at that point. Now he's coming off another layoff. He's one of these horses that when I watch him run, I just think shorter is better. I love 6 furlongs with him as opposed to any longer than that. And he just seems like one that, based on the way this race came up, he's going to have to come from at least mid-pack. So if he can adapt to that kind of running style, I think he's a horse that could outrun his odds here. And, it's a race that otherwise I was just kind of leaning towards the favorites, and he's the one horse I could make a case for at a bit of a price.
Yeah, and we're going to need some prices in the sequence based on how we handicapped a couple of the legs. So it's one where you're going to have to craft some tickets and make sure you get some on there, and he certainly fits the bill.
Let's move on to the feature race in this sequence. Race 12. It is the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby, going the 1.125 distance for the 3-year-olds. And Craig, I did a video solo on this race the other day for DRF, and I was like changing my picks right up until the time we recorded, because it's just a really hard race to know where the value is going to be. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to bet it. There are so many ways to go. There are 4 horses, I think, that will be single-digit odds that look like they're going to take most of the money. And I can't say that I love any of them, though I do think Reincarnate, the number 8, is a legitimate favorite. He's 5-2 on the morning line. I mean, a lot's been made of the fact that he had a troubled trip in the Rebel last time, and I think that's a fair way to view it. He just did not have the early speed that you would have expected him to show. Through no fault of a stumble at the break or other horses interfering with him, he was just really sluggish out of the starting gate, so maybe that's a concern in and of itself. But I thought, all things considered, he adapted well to being farther back than he had ever been before in the early stages of that race. Took a real bump in the middle of the stretch from Bourbon Bash, who's also in this field, and was finishing best of all at the end. So I thought Reincarnate showed some versatility and talent last time, and I guess he's the horse to beat in here, but I'm not, based on the last effort, I'm not sure what kind of trip he's going to work out.
Yeah, it's a tough race. I agree with you on the 4 horses. I mean, I think they're all the 4 single-digit horses on the morning line, the only 4. It's just a matter of which ones do you like. I think Reincarnate did have some legitimate trouble in the stretch. But just as you say, some of it was his own doing. He's a horse who's always been up near the front in his races in California. When he won the Sham and when he broke his maiden, he basically went wire to wire in both. Not sure how he found himself so far back near the back, other than lack of interest at the start, and that's always a little bit of a negative for me. Make no mistakes, he was still being trained by Bob Baffert at the time. That race was right when the cutoff was coming. So I'm really not sure what to make of him. I certainly can't dismiss him. He ran well enough that I think he is a major player in here. I just wouldn't want to lean on him too heavily. But as you say, I could say that for all the horses in here. And we'll just kind of go through them one at a time, see what we think. I guess the other one that I know we both liked Red Route 1, at least to some extent last time. I don't remember the specifics. But I know I had some money on him and got pretty excited turning for home because I thought he was going to run him down. Wasn't able to get there. He adds blinkers. I don't know what to make of that. Generally, I think blinkers on is a negative for the most part. But a horse like this, I guess it's got to help because he just dropped so far out of the race. Maybe some of that was because the pace was blazing fast. We have all the fractions coded in red, 140 pace figures at the quarter and half mile. So part of me is torn on him, but mostly it's a more negative view than I had last time because I can't help but think he had an absolutely perfect trip, even though he was miles back and couldn't quite get the job done. Looked like he was going to win and just hung through the stretch. And I'm just never a big guy adding blinkers is going to be some cure-all.
Yeah, I've been a fan of this horse for most of his career. I made that push for him in the Brutus Futurity last year, but he outran his odds to be third that day. And I kind of feel like I have to go off him here because, I mean, you summed it up well. he's just dropped so far out of his races. He got the perfect pace situation last time, and he still was too far back to get there at the end. He just makes that belated run, and they're probably adding the blinkers for exactly the reason that you said. They want to get him a little bit closer to the pace, but who knows if that's going to take away from his late kick a little bit. So I have some reservations about him, especially if he's going to be as short as that 3-1 morning line suggests. I have some skepticism about that, but I mean, he definitely is one of the favorites in this race. And Craig, I think that's a good segue into talking about the pace situation, because even though that fast pace flag is showing up, we already talked about how it's a little unclear what Reincarnate's going to do. Will he have the speed that he showed before? Will he run like he did last time? And, aside from him, you just have those two speeds, the number 3 Harlow Cap and the number 4 Two Eagles River. So I don't think it's a guarantee that this race is going to fall apart in the same way that the Rebel did.
No, I would agree. Those are not exactly burners that were showing on the front. This is more a case of just a lot of the horses in the field have shown some speed, enough to be rated as at least trackers, horses that like to be close. Because when you look at the PPs of Harlow Cap and Two Eagles River, it's not like they're on the front end setting fast fractions or that they were leading races when they sprinted. So I'm more on your side. I would expect more of just an average kind of pace in this race, and I don't think that's going to do any favors for Red Route 1.
What do you make of Rocket Can? I've seen a lot of people landing on him in this race, and I guess I kind of understand it. I mean, he's moving in the right direction for Bill Mott. Both of his starts this year have been improvements on his prior form. And he ran well to be second to Forte last time in that Fountain of Youth. The Fountain of Youth is one of those races, even though it's a dirt race, we often say this about turf races, where I feel like Forte carried along some horses to bigger speed figures than maybe they otherwise would have gotten in that race. I mean, that's a number that makes a lot of sense for Forte, and it's a little high for some other horses in that race. So I'll be interested to see if Rocket can back it up here. He's a horse that I was a fan of early in his career. I feel like recently he's gotten a lot of good trips, so I'm not that enthusiastic about him, but he's the kind of horse that if he drifts up to 6-1, I could get interested. I just don't think he's going to be that big of a price.
Yeah, I'm starting to think we're going to land on the same horse here, but it's okay. Sometimes it happens, and we've done just fine in those scenarios. I'm kind of lukewarm on Rocket Can. He ran that 115, which I think is the best last race speed figure in the field. I wonder how much of that is kind of a suck-up figure where he was just chasing a superior horse. And I don't mean suck-up in the way that he dropped way back and just picked up the pieces. I mean, he was running early. He's the one that actually made a run at Forte up towards to get toward the lead, and this wasn't good enough to hold him off. But sometimes I do think that makes horses run their best numbers. I'm going to knock him too much because since he got good when he broke his maiden, he shows up, runs his best race every time. I just have a feeling he's going to be overbet a little bit off of that having Forte at the top of his running line.
Well, Craig, I'll let you go first. Who do you like in this race?
I didn't want to like Angel of Empire, but I do. He is a horse who was just gotten better and better every single time out. The Risen Star, I don't think that was a fluky result. He did come from back in the back of the pack position-wise. It was a pretty quick pace, and it's not like he was way back. He was in front of the other closers who ran pretty well in there, outside of Two Phils, who I think moved way too early, and we saw what he came back to do on synthetic last weekend. And I just think Angel of Empire is a horse who's just moving in the right direction. He has good tactical speed. I actually like when a horse who's shown that he can be up kind of close, which he did in his allowance win. He was just a couple lengths off the lead. He was able to drop further back, maintain that run. And I just think he's a horse that's moving in the direction you want. We talk about a lot 3-year-olds who are improving as the season goes on. He's the one, and I just think out of the 4 major players in here, he's going to offer the most value, and it's not particularly close. I think he might actually go off a little bit higher, which seems crazy coming off a win in the Risen Star, but it just seems like the others have more of a following and more of people seem to think they have more upside for some reason.
Yeah, that's exactly how I was viewing it, Craig. It's like you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, it seems kind of crazy to say that about a horse that's trained by Brad Cox and ridden by Flavian Pratt, but I'm getting that same sense. I don't see anybody picking this horse. It feels like there's much more fascination with, the Rocket Cans and Reincarnates among the favorites, and there's even another horse that's a bigger price that I've seen a lot of people landing on. But Angel of Empire, he's not getting that respect, and I feel like there's this narrative out there that he was some lucky winner of the Risen Star, but when I go back and watch that race, I don't completely agree with that. I mean, it's not like he was that far off a horse like Two Phils in the early stages of that race, and a lot of people think that Two Phils ran the best race in the Risen Star because he was the one that made that first move into an honest pace. While Angel of Empire was actually moving in tandem with Two Phils on the far turn, trying to follow him. It's really hard to take in replays of the Risen Star because it's so dark, but I mean, I did look up the head-on replay to try to get a better vantage point of that far turn run that's so hard to see on the pan. And I mean, there's a point in the race where Angel of Empire is trying to move up and follow Two Phils, and he actually has to briefly pause in traffic because there was a horse that was fading that was part of that pace that he had to go around, so he lost a little momentum coming to the quarter pole, and he was finishing up best of all. I mean, I didn't think there was anything fluky about that. I mean, Sun Thunder arguably got a better trip than he did, saving ground, and Angel of Empire was putting that one away at the end of the race. And you might say that his prior form makes him look like a big surprise, but I had Marcus on that TimeformUS Forecast that week that we handicapped the Risen Star, and Marcus made some really good points about Angel of Empire's prior race in the Smarty Jones and how it was so much of a prep, and he had this huge gallop out, and it was a much better performance than it might look like on paper. And as I was talking with Marcus, I was kind of realizing I missed this horse a little bit in the Risen Star, and I wanted to revise my picks. But I think he's really coming along with every race, and I'm not going to be surprised when he takes yet another step forward here. And I agree. I have this sense that he actually could drift up off that 9-2. I'd love to see it happen. I think 9-2 is about a fair price on him. So we'll see what happens with the wagering. What do you make of the other horse coming out of the Risen Star, Craig? Harlow Cap. I've seen a lot of people liking this horse. He's 15-1 on the line. I think he'll go off a bit lower than that. He was involved in that pace that undisputably fell apart in the Risen Star. I mean, it wasn't on his pace. You see that red color-coded TimeformUS pace figure. I still don't know if I think he really wants to go a mile and an eighth, but he probably will face a better pace situation here.
Yeah, that was my concern. I know the pace was a little hot. That's going to happen in these 3-year-old preps, though. Maybe not so much in this one. I didn't like the way he finished that race off at all. I know the flow was for more of horses from the back, and it's just more a visual for me because he ran a nice 110 speed figure 2 back, which is the same that Angel of Empire ran winning the Risen Star. But I'm just not a big a fan as him. I think he would have to get off easy on the front end to have a chance to finish off this race at a mile and an eighth, and I just don't see it.
Yeah, I do prefer him to the other speed, Two Eagles River, who got a perfect trip last time setting a slow pace. He's not for me in this spot. But yeah, Craig, we're pretty much in agreement here. And hopefully we can be right about this one, because this Arkansas Derby is a race where I think you have to stake out an opinion. It's not the kind of race where you want to use all 4 favorites because they're probably going to be overbet in that sequence if you try to go deep in this Arkansas Derby. Let's move on to the final leg of this sequence. It's an allowance N1X. This one, though, unlike the earlier one, going the 2-turn distance of 1 mile. Another big field signed on, 12 runners. There's even an also eligible entrant. And Craig, I have trouble with this race. This is a real problem for me in the pick 5 because I just don't like anybody that much. I mean, the horse that's made the favorite, the number 1 Knocker Down, drawn on the rail, I get it. I mean, this horse has some big speed figures, and I don't know what they paid for him after that race at Mahoning Valley. He apparently was a private purchase and switched over to Brad Cox, but whatever they paid, I'm assuming that they'd like the money back at this point, because I don't think that they'd be still looking to get through the M1X allowance condition, buying this horse after some of his efforts for the prior connections from late last year. It just feels like they're trying to change it up or try something new with a horse that just feels like he's lost his desire to win. I mean, he's still running some decent speed figures, but he's been a disappointment.
I'm like you. I don't love anybody in this race. We've talked about favorites that you want to maybe use to get through a race. This is not one of them. If Knocker Down wins, I'm out. I don't see any way you can look at this horse's PPs and think that he wants to go 2 turns. He's tried it a couple times. The results have been dreadful, to be kind. He just cannot finish off his races. And on top of that, he seems to have lost the form he had before he was purchased privately. Yeah, his speed figures are okay. He got beat at 1-5 last time. Then he got buried at 3-5. Last time he was 8-5. He ran okay behind Skelly, but he was never actually in that race. If you wanted to base it only on speed figures, sure, he's a contender. I don't see any way this horse is getting a mile, and if he does, I'll be tearing up tickets.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about him is he is like a gigantic horse. I mean, he's huge. So sometimes you say horses that have that size and scope to them, they want to go longer. I wouldn't say his PPs necessarily corroborate that, and he's going to be a short price. So I don't typically want to bet horses at short prices that are trying something like this for the first time, especially when there's some evidence that they might not handle it. So we're in agreement. Trying to beat Knocker down in this last leg, but the question becomes, where do you go? Because there's not too many horses in here that I trust more. I mean, I guess the logical other horse to use, or maybe the logical alternative to Knocker down, is the number 2 50-cent Dollars, who is moving up out of starter allowance races, but I think those starter fields that he faced, particularly last time, were actually decent. The horse that beat him, Disc Jockey, has run some big speed figures before, so he makes sense going out for the Chris Hartman barn. I don't know that he's going to be that big of a price either, but at least I have a little more faith that he's going to respond to these conditions.
Yeah, the TimeformUS race ratings for those races, like last one was a 109. It's only a couple points below this one, so I don't have a big concern. My one concern would be he's a horse who likes to be on the front end. We show Knocker down on the front end. I don't know if in his current form he's going to be able to be on the lead from the front. Maybe he will. But part of why he's going off form is he seems to have lost the early speed he had in his better races. So the pace situation's a little murky for me. I have no problem with 50-cent Dollars, other than he's probably going to be the second choice. Some others I'd mention, Backring Luck, the 6 horse. He's been running fine. His speed figures are okay. He's 9-2 on the morning line. I don't know if he's really going to be that. I guess he probably will. So he's one I'd want to use. Efficiency, the 11 horse, is one who's consistently runs those mid 100 type speed figures. He's one that doesn't need some pace. So if the speed does go, kind of gaps out the field, I think he could get some good position. But again, like you said, I don't love anybody in here. I just want to beat the favorite.
I guess the problem I have with all these horses, Craig, is they all want to be forward, and not everybody can be forwardly placed in a race going a mile. It's going to depend a lot on the break. I mean, they run right into that clubhouse turn. So, I mean, I hear you. I think that horses like Backring Luck, who can stalk a little bit, I mean, he makes some sense. And Efficiency, he's another one that has run some good races on the lead, but has also stalked before. But he's drawn so wide, if there are a lot of horses that are gunning out of the gate, maybe he's going to get hung out 4 or 5 wide into that clubhouse turn. So I'm worrying about the trips for a lot of these horses, and I find myself considering some runners that might not look great on paper, but could just have this race fall into their laps. And this is the kind of race that the more I go through it, I might project that the speed figure of the winner is a lot lower than it might look like it should be on paper. It's the kind of race where, a lot of these horses can run numbers of 110 plus on the TimeformUS speed figure scale, but I'm not going to be surprised when the winner gets a 107, just because it feels like a race that's not conducive to a lot of horses producing their best form. So through that lens, I want to consider some horses that might look a little inferior. For instance, the number 7, Costa Terra, who is the horse that has the highest late pace rating from TimeformUS in the entire field. And I do want to consider that in a race that feels like it's going to have a legitimately fast pace. And he's just a deep closer, but maybe one that's finding the ideal situation here. He came off a layoff last time to make his first start as a 4-year-old and just ran into a buzzsaw that day. I don't know where Don't Forget came up with that performance out of, but he really ran to win that race by 9 lengths. And he was just a horse that was kind of staying on at the end, much slower pace situation than he's going to encounter here in all likelihood. So he feels like the kind of horse for Steve Asmussen that could take a real step forward second off the layoff. And they once thought highly enough of him to run in some stakes races when he was a younger horse. So maybe there's some upside here. I'd also put in that category a horse like the number 8 Outlier for Lynn Cash. He's not as much of a deep closer, but I think just naturally the way this race is going to be run, he'll be somewhere in mid-pack early. And he's a horse that has some back races that would put him in the mix. His recent form, albeit not great, but we've seen Len Cash resurrect horses that look like they're in bad form before. So I'd consider him, and I guess even Tonka Warrior has some things to recommend, though maybe he doesn't have the upside of some of the others. But it's a race where I want to keep an open mind.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm certainly not going to knock any of your picks because I don't honestly know what direction I'm going to go. But I really like the case you made for Costa Terra, the 7. He's a horse, like you said, he's second start as a 4-year-old. He probably speed figure wise, those speed figures came early in the late winter, early spring of his 3-year-old season. So you could project those several points higher. Had no pace to run into last time. So of the horses you mentioned, he is the one that I think is almost assuredly going to improve off that 100 speed figure he ran last time and could easily do it 7, 8, 9 points. And that would put him right in the mix.
Yeah, if I had to make a top pick in this race from a value standpoint, it would be him, and we'll see how the rest of it shakes out. But it's a difficult way to end this sequence. There are a lot of horses that you could build cases for if you're trying to beat that likely favorite knocker down, drawn down towards the rail. Well, Craig, we talked about how this might be a difficult one to put together, and I kind of feel the same way after we've talked about it. Let's go back through and just summarize how we might approach a sequence like this, and I'll let you start.
Yeah, in the maiden race, and it's still hard for me to wrap my head around the purses of these maiden races these days. $110,000 maiden race. I don't really have any knocks on the favorite Seeking Unity. I would have to use him. We talked about a few others that would be C's, like Quality Chic. But the ones I'm interested in most that would be a price would be the 4 Gamekeeper, just knowing Wayne Lucas's MO. And also the Auto Glide, the Steve Asmussen second-time starter moving off turf. Those two could offer some value. Only 2 horses for me in the fantasy. She's Looking Lucky, Wet Paint. I would use them in equal strength. In that allowance race, I didn't want to dismiss the 2 favorites. I mean, I wanted to, but I really couldn't. I think they're probably the 2 best in the field. I would have to use them. If I was going to throw in some others, I would maybe go for some deep closers. I mentioned Ultimate. I mentioned Rider Special. Not overly optimistic. They would need a total meltdown, but I think that the 2 are legit. In the 12th, the Arkansas Derby, I'm going to lean on Angel of Empire pretty heavily. If so far picked a lot of horses that aren't going to be big prices, so I'm not going to go too deep in this field. The only other one I would use would be Rocket Can. I trust him a little more than I do Reincarnate, and especially Red Route 1. I just feel like he didn't get it done last time when he probably should have. Not a big fan of the blinkers, so I'm going to lean on those 2, particularly Angel of Empire would be an A. And in the last race, my main opinion is just to beat Knocker down. He won't be on my tickets at all. If he wins, I lose, and then I would use some of the others that we mentioned in here, including the horse you sold me on, Costa Terra.
Yeah, we have plenty of spots of agreement in this sequence. I'm also going to spread a bit in that first leg, using the number 1 Night Effect and Auto Glide towards the rail. Both of them as A is the 1 and the 2. I'd also use Seeking Unity as an A. He just makes too much sense in this race. And then the number 4 Gamekeeper would be the other one that I would have as maybe a B or a C type. But primarily those 4, I mean, I suppose I could throw on Quality Chic if it seemed like this was coming up a light play, but I'm not sure that's going to be the case. But that's how I would approach that first leg of the sequence. In the fantasy, I'm just going to use She's Looking Lucky and Wet Paint and Equal Strength. I know that's not particularly great pick 5 strategy. It's just the way that I see this. And I'm not going to try to overcomplicate that one. In the 11th race, I like both of the favorites, Go West and Favorite Outlaw, all the way on the outside. I would prefer Go West a little bit more. And the other horse that I want to use is the number 4, Dr. Perry, and I'd probably upgrade him all the way to A status, using him with Go West, just because I think he's going to slip through the cracks a little bit in this race, and we'll get the right kind of pace set up. So I'm going to use him. And there are a lot of horses in this race that I'm not that interested in. Maybe at a price, I'll throw in a horse like the number 9, Absolute Chaos, as a C, but I'll try to keep it as thin as I can in that large field 11th race. Craig and I pretty much agree in the Arkansas Derby. I like Angel of Empire. If this race gets bet the way that I think it will, he's going to offer the best value of those favorites, so I will press him. Also using Reincarnate, who I just think is the most likely winner. Being a little bit against horses like Red Route 1 and Rocket Can. And I could use Harlow Cap as more of a B type. I'm skeptical that he's going to be that 15-1. I think he'll get bet down a little bit more, but he's still going to be 7 or 8-1 at the lowest. So I would use him as well. And then closing things out in that 13th race, Craig and I, we both agree. Being against Knocker Down, I'll leave him off my tickets. I'll use the number 2 50-cent dollars. He just makes too much sense, and Craig made fine cases for horses like Back Ring Luck and Efficiency, but the number 7 Costa Terra is the horse that I'm really interested in. He'll be an A for me, just hoping that the pace comes apart for him. So that's a look at that pick 5 sequence. Not an easy one to put together a ticket for, Craig, but I think if you have opinions along the way, it's the kind of sequence where you just want to lean on those opinions and hope to be right.
Yeah, like I said, you don't want to spend a fortune, and because this is a sequence that could very well not pay a lot, so I don't want to, play a $50 ticket and hit a $120 pick 5. So I'm going to use some of those prices. So as always, it was fun doing this. We only have one more week of these big Derby preps left. A lot of good racing this weekend that I'm looking forward to, and I'm not sure which one we'll do next week, but we're going to have plenty to choose from.
For sure. 3 major Derby preps taking place next week. So we'll get to that in due time. But remember that you can always catch these TimeformUS podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for listening to the forecast this week. And remember, you can catch Craig and I doing the TimeformUS Pacecast next week, and we recap these stakes races from Oaklawn, as well as other stakes action and Derby preps taking place all around the country this weekend. So make sure to tune into that TimeformUS Pacecast coming up next week.